Hi, I'm Lee. Welcome to the channel. I hope you're having a lovely day. I'm a short, overweight, middle-aged white dude. I've got thinning brown hair, black gloss. I'm wearing a grey t-shirt. I'm sitting in my office with a few coloured lights behind me. And in this video, I'd like to compare iPhone Pro and a more dedicated Pro camera. I'm going to do the quotation marks Pro, and look at the differences between when you might want to use, an iPhone Pro, when you might want to use a more dedicated camera. Now, first of all, I suppose I should introduce myself. I am a filmmaker based in Melbourne, Australia, and I do mostly corporate work. I do some commercials, some documentary stuff, things like that. In fact, back in 2020, I actually shot a pilot for a show that I was pitching to a few of my clients. I'll put a link up in the corner here. That was shot entirely on iPhone. So, spoiler alert, you absolutely can shoot high-end professional stuff with iPhones or iPhone Pros. But we've come a long way since then, so I wanted to look at how that comparison works now. A little caveat here in terms of who this video is for. So I think if you are just someone who takes photos and videos for fun and for casual, for social and that kind of stuff with your iPhone or iPhone Pro or whatever camera phone you have, this video may not be entirely for you, because even myself, my son is 9 years old, and I would say that 99.9% of the photos and videos that I've taken of my son since he was born were taken on my iPhone, because it's just easy. It's in your pocket, it's right there, push a button, camera, click, happy days. I'm looking more at if you are a professional photographer or video professional or cinematographer, or if you are, let's say, an amateur who likes to buy nice expensive photography or video gear. That's more who this video is targeted for. And the reason why I mention this is because I'm going to be discussing some photography and video concepts. I'm not going to go into huge detail explaining that. I'm happy to do other videos about it. In fact, what this channel is going to be, hopefully, is a lot of tips and tricks about tech in general, but also a lot of photography and video based stuff, because that's what I do and what I'm interested in and what I like to talk about. So let's get into comparing iPhone Pro and dedicated camera. So to begin with, let's look at price. So an iPhone 16 Pro, which is coming out in September 2024, at 1 terabyte will cost you $2,699 in Australia. Let's just round that out to 2,700. And the camera that I've chosen to compare it to, and again, you could compare it to tons and tons of cameras, is the Lumix Panasonic GH5. Not because I've got one. This is actually a Lumix 5S2X, whatever you call it. I've got quite a few different cameras. This is a Sony A7S Mark III. I've got an FX6 in the cupboard, a whole bunch of... My wife has a rule, camera in, camera out, and I may have broken that rule a couple of times, but that's neither here nor there. I'm sure she's not watching that. We're fine. So the camera I've chosen to compare it to is a Panasonic GH5. GH5 costs about $2,000 Australian, so already it's $700 cheaper, but there's quite a few things that iPhone and iPhone Pro come with that the GH5 doesn't come with, and so on and so forth. So to begin with, the iPhone has 1 terabyte of storage. Now I'm going with the 1 terabyte model. You do have lesser storage models. I think there's a 256 and a 512. But if you are shooting photography or video for high-end stuff or for more professional, if you're more interested in that kind of thing, you will always run out of storage. I'll give you an example. I have the 1 terabyte 15 Pro right here, and I'm always running out of space on it. My wife, on the other hand, only uses about 140 gigs of space on her phone. So that's the way I'm making that comparison. So already you've got 1 terabyte built into the phone, so you need to get a memory card for the camera. I would say just go with a 256 or 128. That's probably fine to get started with. Or let's say we're going to go with two 256s. So each of those costs, let's say, $100 each. So we're $200 up, so 2,200. So it's been a while since I actually bought memory cards, and turns out they're like $300 each. So whoops. Then obviously you're going to need a lens. The iPhone, I know this isn't entirely accurate, but technically comes with 3 lenses sort of thing. So with the iPhone Pro, this is looking at the 16 model, which, by the way, I will be getting an iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro this Friday. It's now Tuesday when I'm filming this. Tuesday? Yes, Tuesday. You can see why I call this channel Rambling Tech. And I'll be looking at all of those functions. So the iPhone 16 Pro comes with the main what Apple calls the Fusion camera, which is a 48 megapixel camera, 24 millimeter focal length at f1.78. Then you've got the ultra wide, which is also a 48 megapixel camera at 13 millimeter focal length, and it's an f2.2. And then finally you have the 12 megapixel 5x telephoto camera, which is an equivalent of 120 millimeters at f2.8. Now you could look at getting 3 different prime lenses to get for the the bigger camera, but I'm just going to round it out and say, let's say you get a 24-105 f4, not nearly the same, but that's sort of what I'm going to use it to comparison. And again, I'm being vague because I want to go sort of more high level stuff as opposed to exact, dollar for dollar, bullet point for bullet point comparison. So in terms of price, you are going to end up spending more on a dedicated camera with all the accoutrement that you have to add. So you can't sort of go, oh, well, I could get a dedicated camera for the price of an iPhone 16 Pro. Having said that, the iPhone 16 Pros aren't cheap, so they're getting close. So that's looking at a sort of not a direct, but a comparison of price. So I kind of alluded to this in the previous section, but one of the first things to look at is obviously, a dedicated camera is fantastic as a dedicated camera, but it's just a camera, whereas an iPhone is a phone. It's what did Steve say? It's an internet communication device. It's a iPod video device. You know, the Apple fanboys will know what I'm talking about. But so, iPhone can do so much more, particularly in terms of instantaneousness. And what I mean by that is if you're out shooting video with your camera, if you are out shooting photos with your camera, when you get home and you want to start, or even on the road, you want to start editing it, you got to take the memory card out of the camera, put it into your iPad or into your laptop, and then you need to start editing it, and then you share it and all that kind of stuff. Whereas if you're shooting stuff on your iPhone, you can, the stuff's on your iPhone already. You've already got the editing apps on your iPhone already, and you can just start editing it and sharing it, and out it goes. It does all the other phone stuff. And this kind of leans a little bit back to the price thing as well, in terms of most of us are going to buy a phone no matter what. Like it's difficult to live in the modern world today without, it's possible, but it's difficult to live in the modern world today without a phone. So you're going to buy a phone. So a big part of this whole argument is if you're buying a phone, why not spend that extra money to get the fancier phone? And then you get so many camera functions that you don't actually need one of those. So that's, a big part of this argument. So in terms of software, I think obviously the phone, it's a no-brainer sort of thing. But I touched on an area where the dedicated camera, I think, is actually better if we're talking about sort of high-end, particularly video production. Because when you're shooting video with iPhone Pro, first of all, it's fantastic that you can now capture 10-bit ProRes, HDR footage or log footage on your iPhone. I mean, it's mind-boggling that you can do that with a phone. But here's the thing, those files are huge. Like, they are really big. If you're using the native app on iPhone, particularly if you're shooting ProRes, it's only giving you ProRes HQ, which is the biggest format of ProRes. I'm, for example, shooting myself right here. I'm eating my own dog food on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I'm using the Blackmagic camera app because that allows me to at least shoot ProRes LT. So I can still get ProRes, but it's a much smaller file type. Still big, but much smaller. And getting those files off your phone onto your computer, if you're then going to edit on your computer or if you're going to edit on your iPad, if you've recorded directly onto your phone, getting those files off, even with the faster connection that we've got on the phone, it takes a long time to copy those files off. Whereas you just pull the memory card out of your camera, pop it in your SD card reader, and copy it off much quicker to copy those files off. On the third hand, nowadays, even now, like I'm recording this onto an external hard drive on my iPhone, and the beauty of that is I can then just pop that hard drive off of my phone, it's magnetized onto the MagSafe, and plug it into my computer, and I could copy it, or I could just start editing directly off that hard drive because it's a 2 terabyte drive. So, it kind of balances out, doesn't it? So that's another thing to look at with the comparison between iPhone Pro and a dedicated camera. In this bit, I want to talk about the comparison in terms of having manual controls versus having software controls on an iPhone and a dedicated camera. This is somewhere where I think a dedicated camera, particularly for professional work, head and shoulders above using an iPhone or an iPhone Pro or any phone, because you'll notice that on this camera there are lots and lots of dials and buttons and ways that I can access. So if I want to change my ISO, I just push a button. Change my ISO. I want to change my aperture, there's a dial. If I want to change my shutter speed, there's a dial on the back. There's all these buttons. So if you are shooting an event or anything where you need to change your settings really quickly, it's really easy to have manual buttons on a camera. And again, you've got to go the more high-end camera, the more buttons you get generally. I like having physical buttons. So if I need to change something quickly, I can change it really quickly. Whereas with an iPhone or any phone, if I want to change settings, even in something as fancy as the Blackmagic camera app, I've got to tap a button, go down, change it, then tap a button, get out, blah, blah. It's not as quick. It's getting a lot better. And I think Apple's sort of done a tip of the hat to this with iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Pro, where they've added the dedicated camera button, and it's a touch button. So you can actually change settings much quicker and easier without having to dig deeper. So I think Apple's aware of this, quite frankly, shortcoming, or where having physical buttons is better. So this is a place where I think iPhone and iPhone Pro are getting better, but you still have more physical dedicated buttons for particular things on dedicated cameras. I think for this, dedicated cameras are probably a little bit better. When it comes to accessorizing for your iPhone Pro or your dedicated camera, you can go to town. I've got 3 drawers full of stuff that I've got for, accessories for iPhone, for shooting more high-end, more professional looking stuff. Having said that, I've got 15 or 20 drawers of accessories that I've got for the bigger cameras. So you can go even more to town. I like the fact that you can get cages now for iPhones. So if you need to attach more things to it, you can. Just like you have this cameras in a cage right here. So you've got more attachment points if you're mounting it. I've got another channel about electric cars, renewables and stuff like that. So I do a lot of work of attaching cameras inside of cars. So having attaching points are really important. This is a point where, again, dedicated cameras, I think, stand out compared to shooting with phones, because on dedicated cameras, you have far more dedicated ports. So, I've got mic in, audio out, I've got HDMI out, I've got USB, I've got remote, you've got tons of ports that you can plug stuff into, whereas with iPhone and generally most phones these days, you've got one port. So for example, the phone that I'm filming myself on here, I've got a USB hub coming off of it, and one of those USB things is going to the hard drive and one thing's going to the microphone, and I could have it going to a keyboard, or I could have it going to an HDMI port so I could monitor it and all that kind of stuff. Although now that's not as important, at least with the monitoring thing, because you've got apps like Final Cut Pro for iPad and the Blackmagic camera app, which is what I'm using right here. So I'm filming myself on this iPhone, but I've got it wirelessly transmitting to my iPad right in front of me, so I can check that the recording hasn't stopped, or I'm out of focus, or something's happened. This is a groundbreaking thing, which I was begging developers for the last year, particularly for my shooting in car stuff, because very often in the past, if you set up a phone filming you could use the front-facing camera, but the best camera is the #1 camera, what Apple calls the Fusion camera. So if you want to film yourself with the best camera / lens on the iPhone 16 Pro, you can't see the screen. So there's times where I've set it up in a car, pushed record, and silly me, I forgot to put the phone into airplane mode, and either a call came through or it picked up on a Wi-Fi network, or some notification came up, and that stopped the recording. FYI, if there's any developers from the Blackmagic camera app watching, could you put a setting in there that says, if I get a notification, basically no matter what happens on the phone, don't stop recording? And I was blathering on while I'm driving, talking to this camera, and I didn't realize that it stopped recording 1 minute into a 9-minute take. Of course, now with the dedicated, being able to transmit wirelessly, that's not really an issue, sort of neither here nor there. So that solves that problem. But yeah, with accessories, I think it's easier to accessorize dedicated cameras than it is to accessorize iPhones. That's changing a lot. But I also think by accessorizing iPhone a lot, it kind of negates a lot of the advantages of shooting with iPhone. Like, one of the reasons why I shot with an iPhone for that project that I shot back in 2020 was it was a concept for a travel show. And I really liked the idea of shooting that with phones, not because it was gimmicky, but because if you turn up to shoot something somewhere and you turn up, you know, with a big camera on your shoulder and lights and all that sort of stuff, it's noticeable. And particularly if you're interviewing people who aren't used to being on camera, it's quite intimidating for them. Whereas if you just show up and you just, you know, you're filming them with your phone, fewer people ask questions and it's not as intimidating for the people that you're filming. So I think one of the huge advantages of shooting stuff with phones is that it's far less in people's faces sort of thing. But as you accessorize and add more accoutrement to the phone, that negates a bit of that advantage. But on that, a big part of that is the size, the fact that the phone is in your pocket, you pull it out, you can very quickly and easily shoot something. And now that you can shoot in, you know, high-end formats, I think that's fantastic. One area where iPhone struggles and yet I think achieves some amazing results is what's called shallow depth of field. Now, what shallow depth of field is referring to, for those who aren't aware, is where you are in focus and the background behind you is blurry. So anything is in focus and the other thing is blurry. So for example, if I put my hand here and tell the phone to focus on my hand, it focuses on my hand and now my hand is in focus, but I'm blurry and the background behind me is blurry. And then when I tap on myself to focus on me, I'm in focus and now the background behind me is slightly blurry. And how cameras do this is the aperture. So when you're talking f1.2 or f4 or so on, the lower the number, the more blurry you can make things, basically. And with dedicated lenses, you can do that pretty amazingly with dedicated cameras. This is somewhere where the iPhone struggles a bit just because of the laws of physics. So the further away I get from the lenses on the phone, the harder it is for the phone to separate me from the background and make me in focus and make the background blurry or more blurry. For example, you'll notice that when I put my hand here and I focus on my hand, there we go, I'm quite blurry and the background is really blurry. But when I focus on myself, I'm in focus and the background's blurry, but it's not super blurry. Whereas if I was using, you know, an f2.8 lens on this camera, I could make the background a lot more blurry. So that's where, when you're just talking about shooting analog, as it were, dedicated cameras with dedicated lenses are going to do better with that than a phone. But Apple is trying to overcome the laws of physics, quite frankly, with software. So in photography, they've got a feature called portrait, and in video, I think they call it cinematic. And I have feelings and thoughts about the word cinematic. I think it's a little bit overused and I could be a very grumpy old man and go far more into it, but let's just leave it at that. So the cinematic mode in video makes you in focus and everything behind you sort of blurry. And it's gotten a lot better than it used to be. Like, this came out, I think, first in 2020, and every year it's gotten better and better because it's actually using software, because it's actually, and stop me if I'm wrong, so please let me know in the comments if I'm getting it wrong, but I think the way that does it, it actually uses two of the lenses or two of the cameras, and one sort of gets that in focus and that in focus. Maybe the way it does it is different, but it's using both of them, and then it sort of picks what's in focus and what's out of focus. So on the one hand, it's not true shallow depth of field, but it looks pretty darn good, and every year with software updates, it's looking better and better. And here's where what iPhone is doing is a big advantage over that. So when you're using a dedicated camera, what you have decided is in focus and what you've decided is out of focus, that's it. That's in focus, that's out of focus. You can't change that later. But with iPhone, because it's doing it sort of in software, in post, I could make the background in focus and me out of focus if I shot this in cinematic mode, or if I shot portrait mode in photography. So whilst, you know, for the purists among us, it's not real shallow depth of field, and so you know, you're not getting real shallow depth of field when you're shooting it with iPhone, and it's real shallow depth of field when you're shooting it with a camera. But on the other hand, you can do some pretty cool stuff with the software fake, you know, shallow depth of field. So again, good and bad. A big part of why I wanted to do this video is when you often see behind the scenes footage of shot on iPhone stuff that Apple's done, one of the things that I often noticed is that there's like 3 trucks worth of camera gear and a crew of 40, and you're like, well, obviously it looks good if you're going to do all of that, because how could it not look good? But here's the thing that some people don't think about is even when you're shooting with $150,000, Arri camera, you still need that 3 trucks of lighting gear and that crew of 40, because it's not so much the camera, it's more the knowledge of the people behind that camera that make that footage look amazing. So I think it's actually a great thing that iPhone has come so far that you can shoot 10-bit ProRes log, which is, similar to the 10-bit ProRes log that you get on these big fancy cameras. You can put lenses on iPhones and that kind of stuff. So I think in a lot of situations, the fact that you can get footage that's just as good with iPhone is pretty stunning. And again, you do have the advantages that I've spoken in this video. So in summation, I think, as with most things that I will end up talking about, it depends. There are times when it's easier just to get a dedicated camera and just shoot stuff with a dedicated camera. But there definitely are times where the instantaneousness of just being able to pull out your iPhone and get high-end, good quality footage is really advantageous. Like when I go on holiday, I can't be bothered to schlep this, whereas my phone is in my pocket all the time. So that, I think, is one of the biggest reasons why being able to capture high-end professional footage with an iPhone doesn't mean you always should, but it's great that you can. Well, I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was useful. If you have found this video helpful or useful, please like and subscribe. For those of you who have already liked and subscribed, thank you so much for your support, and we'll catch you in the next one. Stop banging the table, because I think it's making the phone shake a bit. Summation, take 3 or 4, I don't know, we're well into it. iPhone kind of is and kind of, no. Okay, let's try that again. If you have enjoyed it, well done to me for getting you to enjoy this. Let's not say that.